What happens when the person who holds your most powerful client's trust is the one you fire first? I sat in the corner of the conference room, same seat I'd used for years, legal pad in my lap, more out of habit than necessity. The new CEO, Dr. Evan Kilroy, stood at the head of the table flipping through team folders like auction catalogs. His tone was crisp corporate, amused. He paused at mine. "Selvine Harlow," he said flatly. "No degree, no certifications, no formal department assignment." Then, without looking up, "She's a glorified admin with no degree. Replace her." The room didn't shift. No one flinched. No one asked a question. The director of operations coughed quietly into her sleeve. HR said nothing. The meeting moved forward like nothing had been said. I opened my mouth, just slightly. My throat tightened. My hands twitched automatic, ready to move to sign, to speak in the language that had carried this company through a dozen high-stakes deals. I could have corrected him. I could have reminded them all what I actually did, that I wasn't on paper because no one ever bothered to write it down. But I didn't speak. I sat back, spine-straight eyes forward, and watched the agenda roll on. They had no idea. Rewind a decade. Trident Group had just entered U.S. markets and nearly pulled out after 2 disastrous meetings. Their CEO, Thomas Delqua, born deaf and mute, refused to work through third-party interpreters. He said they turned nuance into noise. That's when I offered to try. I'd spent 5 years teaching myself ASL studying after hours signing to my own reflection. I wasn't certified. I wasn't trained. But I was fluent in patience and silence. And when Thomas saw that, he stayed. Since then, I'd been present at every deal, every review, every quiet crisis. I didn't speak for Crestwave. I was Crestwave, at least to him, but none of that made it into the HR system. No one logged trust. No one quantified understanding. So when Kilroy skimmed my file and saw only blank boxes, he assumed there was nothing worth keeping. I didn't walk out that day. I sat through the rest of the meeting, then went back to my desk and finished preparing the visual reports for Thomas's upcoming visit. 3 days from now, he'd arrive expecting me. And I'd already been erased. The meeting room smelled like laminate and cheap coffee. I sat on the far side of a long gray table, empty, but for a closed folder and a legal envelope. The fluorescent light above hummed softly. Dr. Evan Kilroy didn't look up when I entered. He was already seated reviewing something on a tablet, tapping the screen with deliberate indifference. "Selvine," he said, voice dry, "thanks for coming." I nodded once. He didn't return it. "We're shifting toward credential-based performance metrics. You don't meet the threshold, that was it. No mention of my work. No reference to Trident. No question about what I actually did." He flipped the folder shut and pushed the envelope across the table. "You'll receive 3 months severance. HR will coordinate your transition. This is effective immediately." I stared at the envelope. White, neat, final. 18 years. 18 years of early mornings, late flights, closed deals, broken contracts, salvaged mid-meeting hours spent rehearsing phrasing and ASL until every gesture landed with clarity. All reduced to a line on a spreadsheet he probably hadn't read. I stood. "Will Thomas Delqua be informed of this change?" I asked, voice level. Kilroy blinked, annoyed to be interrupted. "We'll assign someone new to that account. Someone certified." I nodded once. Slowly. It was all I could do. I left the room with the envelope in hand and walked past desks that still had my coffee mug sitting on them, past colleagues who didn't look up past the front desk, where the receptionist smiled politely, unaware. Back at my desk, I packed only 3 things: a notebook, a ceramic cup Thomas had given me after the Tokyo deal, and a photo of my mother signing the word "strength" in the backyard of our old house. No goodbyes. No announcement, just a quiet removal. By the time the elevator doors closed, I had already decided on my next step. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just needed to make 3 calls. The first call was to Carl Hartman. He answered on the second ring, his voice still carrying that sharp, deliberate cadence I remembered from night class 20 years ago. "Carl, it's Selvine," I said. A pause, then warmth. Well, I'll be damned. Haven't heard your voice in a year. I won't take long. I just wanted you to hear it from me before it trickles down through the wrong channels. He went quiet. I'm no longer with Crestwave, I said. They didn't ask what I do. Another pause. Then he exhaled through his nose, and I could picture him sitting at his kitchen table, coffee in one hand, pen in the other, already writing it down. They'll be calling me, he said. You know that, right? They might, I replied. I just wanted you to know I won't be answering for them. Message received. The second call went to Tavia Brooks. She was in D.C., probably between federal appointments. When she answered, I heard courtroom chatter in the background and a fast-tapped keyboard. Tavia, it's Selvine. Girl, where have you? I was let go today. Just like that, her voice dropped. They didn't even ask what I do. I said soft but steady. I'm listening. I'm not asking you to do anything. Just know I'm no longer associated with them. There was a beat. Thank you for letting me know. The third call was to Alice Freeman. It rang 4 times, then 5. I was just about to hang up when she answered. Selvine, I won't take much of your time. You're not calling from your Crestwave number. I was let go. Silence. They didn't ask what I do, I said. I wanted Thomas to hear it, not officially, but through the right hands. Alice didn't respond at first, but when she did, her voice was barely a whisper. Thank you for telling me. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask what happened. That night, I knew she'd pass it on. Not with outrage, not with protest, but in a gesture, a shift in her expression, a pause longer than usual. By Thursday morning, the Crestwave building was buzzing with movement again. Catering menus were finalized printouts, aligned, and email threads titled Trident Strategy Final Touches circled like flies. I wasn't there to see it, of course, but I heard things. People talk when they don't realize who still listens. They brought in someone new, a polished interpreter with a crisp blazer and LinkedIn endorsements from people who never stayed in the room long enough to matter. Her name was Quira, certified in 5 modalities, 0 connection to Thomas. She even signs with one hand, someone whispered approvingly like fluency came from Flair. Midday, I got a message from Quinn, a junior project analyst who used to pass me his notes before every review. They sent a memo he typed. It says Trident agreed to proceed without interpreter preference this year. I stared at the screen, rereading it twice. That wasn't just a mistake. That was a lie. Thomas Delqua didn't delegate preference. He didn't tolerate misrepresentation, and he never, not once in 19 years, asked for less continuity. I didn't reply to Quinn. There wasn't anything I needed to say. Crestwave was trying to patch a relationship they didn't understand with the gloss of credentials and assumption. They thought if someone looked sharp enough and moved their fingers quickly enough, it would all translate. But that's not how Thomas operated. He read intention. He watched posture. He measured trust not by who showed up, but by who returned. I turned my phone face down, closed my laptop, and took a deep breath. Let them proceed. Let them pour the lemon water and shine the table and run through their scripted talking points. The moment Thomas walked into that room and didn't see me, the translation would fail long before the first sign was missed. Wednesday morning arrived with a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I wasn't there to see it firsthand, but I didn't need to be. Thomas Delqua entered Crestwave's lobby at precisely 9:02 a.m. Alice Freeman a step behind him as always. He wore his usual charcoal suit, pressed and unassuming, his expression neutral, controlled, but anyone who knew him would have noticed the flicker in his eyes as he scanned the room. Marcus Kilroy was already waiting at the glass doors, posture, relaxed, smile rehearsed. Mr. Delqua, he said, extending a hand that Thomas didn't take. Welcome back to Crestwave. Our certified interpreter will join shortly. Alice turned slightly, her hands rising. She signed the message. Thomas's gaze didn't shift. He didn't sign back. Instead, he looked around the space, slowly past the polished reception desk, the neatly staged hospitality station, the gleaming floors. Then he signed 4 words. "Where's Selvine Harlow?" Alice didn't translate immediately. When she did, her voice was quieter than usual. "She was let go, sir." They stood there in silence. The kind of silence that fills every corner of a room and presses into the walls. Thomas didn't react. Not outwardly, but he didn't move either. Behind the scenes, the panic began. First, they called Carl Hartman. He declined. Then Tavia Brooks. She was in court booked for the entire day. 3 agencies were contacted within the hour. All of them either had no availability or had quietly heard what had happened. I imagine Marcus pacing, jaw-tight, voice low as he hissed orders to his assistant. I imagine the new interpreter sitting in a side room, unaware that she was being prepped to walk into a negotiation with someone who had already noticed her absence. Thomas remained still in the lobby, hands at his sides, eyes unfocused. They could throw the best lighting, the best coffee, the most credentialed face into that room. But no one could sign the one thing he came to see: continuity. They were seconds away from folding the meeting. I stood in the hallway just outside the frosted glass doors of the conference room, watching the tension ripple across faces I used to know. I hadn't been invited. I didn't have a badge. The receptionist had hesitated when I walked in, but I'd nodded once firmly and kept moving. When I pushed the door open, every head turned. No one said a word. Not even Marcus. I didn't look at him. I walked to the far end of the room, past the untouched water glasses, past the untouched stack of agenda packets, and stopped in front of Thomas. No words, just hands. I signed slowly, clearly. No drama, just intent. "You came to speak in your language. I'm still here." Thomas didn't blink, but his shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. His eyes softened. Then he lifted his hands and signed back. Simple. Clean. "I didn't think you'd return." I replied, and he nodded once. That was enough. For a moment, it was just us. Not the executives flanking the walls, not Marcus stiff with confusion and fear, not the assistant half holding her breath, just trust restored in silence. Alice stepped forward then. She turned to Marcus but didn't bother with pleasantries. "We'll sign the current contract," she said evenly, "but this will be our final visit under Crestwave leadership." Someone at the far end of the table made a sound, a breath, a shuffle, but no one challenged her, not even Marcus. He was too busy recalculating, too stunned to understand how quickly the center of the room had shifted. I didn't stay for the signing. I nodded once to Thomas, once to Alice, and turned. No applause, no thank you, just a long corridor carpeted in silence and the familiar weight of a door clicking shut behind me. By the time I reached the street, the meeting had already ended. Not in disaster, but not in success either. It had concluded the way many endings do, quietly and without the people who once assumed they'd be at the center of it. That night, while most of Crestwave's staff celebrated what they believed to be a salvaged contract, an unmarked envelope arrived in the inbox of the company's general counsel. It contained no greeting, no legal threat. Just a video file labeled Boardroom 09, 140918, and an attached memo from Trident Group's legal division. The footage was silent, black and white. I stood at the head of the table, no badge, no authority. Just me signing slowly, deliberately. Thomas responded. Alice stood beside him, silent but watchful. No sound, no dialogue. Just hands and the weight of unspoken trust moving through a room that hadn't earned it. The memo was brief. At the bottom of the page, Alice Freeman had added a short line of translation for context. They fired me for not having a degree. They didn't even ask what I did. The legal department reviewed it twice, then forwarded it to the executive team. By morning, the second envelope arrived. This one bore Trident Group's letterhead. Effective immediately, Trident Group is suspending all future engagements with Crestwave Consulting. Existing contractual obligations will be honored to their minimum legal terms. No further discussions, expansions, or joint ventures will be pursued. No commentary, no explanation, just a signature from Thomas Delqua himself. Inside the executive suite, no one spoke for several minutes. Marcus reportedly stood frozen, one hand on the letter, the other gripping the edge of the table like it might keep the floor from opening beneath him. They had closed the deal but lost the relationship, and Trident hadn't shouted, hadn't protested. They had walked away. I wasn't there to see any of it. I didn't need to be. When trust is gone, the door doesn't slam. It closes with a click and never opens again. And somewhere in a locked folder on Crestwave's server, a silent video played again, frame by frame, gesture by gesture, explaining everything no one had bothered to ask. I hadn't spoken to anyone from Crestwave since I walked out. I hadn't posted online, hadn't emailed former colleagues, hadn't corrected the assumptions I knew would come. I didn't need to. But Marcus Kilroy couldn't stand silence. Within days of Trident's withdrawal, he began rewriting the narrative. First, he had my HR file quietly updated. My original reason for departure executive restructuring was changed to violation of conduct standards. It wouldn't show on a background check, but it would raise eyebrows if someone looked close enough. Then came the phone calls. 2 hiring managers from unrelated firms received informal messages from a trusted source warning that I'd been involved in a client-facing incident that created reputational concerns. Nothing provable, just smoke. The last piece was the article. Buried in an HR trade column online under the title "When Legacy Culture Disrupts Progress," it read, "Sources confirm a recent leadership shift at a Midwest consulting firm, following internal tensions with a long-serving staffer whose communication approach created friction with key clients. Leadership took swift, necessary action to preserve partnerships. There was no name, but everyone inside Crestwave knew who it was about. I didn't respond. Not to the whispers, not to the article. Not to the 3 recruiters who stopped replying after initially reaching out, but someone else did. A white envelope arrived at my apartment. Heavy stock. No return address. Inside was a note hand-signed by Thomas Delqua. "Your integrity is visible even in your absence." That same day, Crestwave's legal team received a letter from Trident Group's legal counsel. "We are aware of recent efforts to harm Ms. Selvine Harlow's professional standing. We are documenting all retaliatory communications. Cease immediately or formal action will follow." I didn't need to send it. I didn't even know it was coming. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone had heard me even though I hadn't spoken. And that silence, it turned out, wasn't empty at all. The board called an emergency session 3 days after Trident's legal warning arrived. The timing wasn't a coincidence. By then, 2 more clients had quietly contacted their Crestwave account managers to reconfirm leadership stability. One postponed their upcoming Q2 planning session. The other removed Crestwave from a short list for a long-term bid. No explanations, just quiet distance. Inside the executive floor, the tension turned from denial to damage control. Legal reviewed the HR audit logs and found exactly what they feared: my personnel file had been altered manually. The original termination reason replaced. The change was made from Marcus Kilroy's credentials. There were no accusations, no yelling, just evidence. The board chair didn't raise his voice. He simply asked for a vote. It didn't take long. Marcus was removed by unanimous decision. No severance, no exit agreement, no protection. He was told to vacate his office by the end of the day. Security didn't escort him. No one needed to. He walked out alone past silent desks, past closed doors, past the same walls he'd once used to climb fast and look down. No one clapped. No one whispered. But later, after the building emptied and the floor lights dimmed, someone left a small folded slip of paper on his desk. No envelope, no signature, just 3 words in block letters. She warned you. I wasn't there, of course. I heard about it through someone who had once sat 2 cubicles away from me. She didn't tell me with glee. She told me like you tell someone a bridge finally broke after so many years of quiet cracking. By the time the story spread through internal emails and office chat threads, my name wasn't spoken, but everyone knew. And while Marcus faded from the system he once controlled, I was preparing for something else entirely, something that would require no defense, no headlines, no revenge, just a table, a new title, and the quiet return of purpose. Weeks later, I stepped through the front doors of Trident Group's Chicago headquarters. No badge, no welcome banner, no press release. Just a quiet nod from security and a name already in the system. The office was nothing like Crestwave. No marble reception, no curated playlists humming in the background. Here, the silence meant focus, and I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. My new office sat 3 doors down from Thomas's. The plaque outside read, Selvine Harlow, Director of Cross-Cultural Integration. It still felt strange to see it in print, not because I didn't believe in the role, but because for so long my work had existed in the spaces between words unrecorded, uncelebrated, invisible. Until now, I didn't speak to the press. I didn't make a LinkedIn post. I just got to work. 2 months later, I received a formal invitation from Crestwave's interim board to return as a guest speaker during their Leadership Reset series. The topic was left blank. I filled it myself. The room was smaller than I remembered. Fewer faces, more empty chairs. Some people looked uncomfortable when I entered. Others wouldn't meet my eyes, but I wasn't there to shame them. I began simply, let me tell you the cost of pretending credentials equal understanding. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't mention names. I didn't have to. They listened. I spoke about presence, about listening with intent, about why trust isn't a bullet point on a resume. It's a language all its own. When I finished, no one clapped. They just sat still and for once truly heard what wasn't being said. That afternoon, the board quietly marked my session as mandatory viewing for all incoming managers. 1 year later, Crestwave rewrote part of its recruitment policy. A new clause read, experience may supersede academic credentials in trust-based roles. They never said who inspired it. But someone in that room left with the understanding that some things don't require a title, just fluency in people.